Question number 5, Dr. David Clark.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development. What is his current best estimate of the financial liability that the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment's use of the AMS payroll system has generated for the Ministry as a result of issues with its compliance with the Holidays Act since its use was approved in 2012?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, first I do need to correct the member's question. The payroll provider has actually been used since 1999. The contract signed in 2004 for its use by one of the legacy agencies at FMB. At this point, I'm not... Oh, it's quite important, I think you'll find. At this point, I'm not prepared to provide the member with any estimate, as I'm not satisfied that any estimate would be sufficiently robust and therefore could be misleading to the House and the wider public. MB are currently working to resolve the issues I've identified with their payroll system with the provider. The most important aspect of that work is remediation of the issues, which will allow both future and historic payments to be calculated correctly. Once that has been achieved, I'll be able to provide the House with an estimate of any outstanding liability.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question. Order. Order. Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Is the Minister aware that according to his own department's data, 763,000 New Zealanders may be owed hundreds, if not thousands, in back pay for the past 6 years?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I'm aware of a range of estimates, and I think the Labour Inspectorate has been very careful to provide lots of provisos on those estimates. But in relation to the payroll, it's important for the member to understand that I have the ministerial responsibility for the MB payroll, and the Minister for Employment Relations has responsibility overall. So if he has some questions he wants to put down in relation to the wider issue with holiday pay, those should best be put down to the Minister of Employment Relations.
I'm going to answer those ones.
Order. 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 If the member wants to have the chance to ask supplementaries, just stand and ask them without the interjection. Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
9 months since he first learned of the issue, when does he expect to have the liability properly quantified?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I don't have a particular date for the member today, but what I can tell him is that I am receiving regular updates on progress, and the actual liability will be able to be determined once the remediation fixes are in place and any adjustments made to both current staff and prior staff. And it's important to note that in terms of cash, the Holidays Act impacts aren't faced in terms of cash terms until the employee leaves or otherwise cashes up that holiday entitlement.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
What is the average amount of back pay owed to affected employees at his ministry?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, I believe I answered that in both the primary question and the supplementary question. We don't have that information at this time.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Has he seen advice from MB which shows that his current approach to this issue will result in many New Zealanders missing out on their rightful holiday pay?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, again, I think the member might be confused. That might be a question he wants to direct to the Minister for Employment Relations. He should go right ahead.